Hi, Janeites, and welcome to episode 7 of the What the Austen podcast. I have some returning guests today. I'm joined by Ellis from History and Ellis and Caily from Half Agony, Half Hope. So welcome back, guys.
Thanks so much for having us back, Izzy.
Hey, I'm so excited to be discussing with you guys, especially some of Austen's more villainous characters. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, so I can't wait.
Absolutely, I'm so excited. So this month it is Villain Off. It's a bit of an October special. We thought that we would do Villain Off, which is basically we're going to take two villains and see which one is worse. So this month it is Wickham and Willoughby. So Alice, you have Wickham, and Caily, you have Willoughby, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right. Shall I introduce Wickham? He's probably one of the more well-known villains, isn't he? So he is Pride and Prejudice's villain. So he's basically a character that comes into the novel fairly early on. So he basically meets the Bennet sisters and they all sort of form a bit of a friendship. He's part of the regiment that is stationed in their local town. He comes across to everyone as charming, fun. He easily forges a lot of friendships, forms a good impression of the Bennet sisters. We notice early on, though, that he's got a little bit of beef with Mr Darcy. And so that's sort of something that we find out more about throughout the book. He turns out to be pretty much, he's money mad, he's greedy, he gambles. He's also got this ability, though, like Elizabeth, to read people, though, in terms of, she sort of prides herself on being able to read characters and things like that. And he does the same, but what he does differently is that he uses that to his advantage. Basically, he is able to manipulate people. He manipulates Elizabeth due to finding out early on, like, her initial dislike of Mr Darcy. So he sort of jumps on that and he's able to use that to forward his cause, basically. And then, spoiler alert, he basically ends up running off with one of her sisters towards the end of the book, which we will, jump onto later.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a bad guy. Yeah. We don't like Wickham. Watch out for the men in red. That's what I say. So, I think it's just good. Should we all just like pick apart Wickham about things that we dislike about him, and we can probably work through the book. But I think probably the main thing is when we first meet him, although he comes across charming, he's kind of also is a bit suspicious. Like all the stuff he says about Darcy, do you not think, like, who would say that to a stranger? Like, tell them their backstory. I don't know about you guys, but I find that is a bit suspicious anyway.
Yeah, that's pretty stuff, as they say. I mean, there's basically there's a whole chapter that is pretty much a conversation between him and Lizzie where he kind of corners her in a way like this party, doesn't he? And sort of says, these are all the things that went on between us. And like I say, uses that initial like of Lizzie to sort of, the dislike of Lizzie, of Miss Darcy that she has, to sort of, jump on that and sort of forward her, get her mind sort of going a bit more. And she uses that as her evidence, basically, to put Darcy down, because he's obviously trying to, what we find out later, he's had dealings with him, which he's obviously trying to cover up, because if those were found out, then people would realise he is a wrong un, basically. For me, even the name Wickham, let's be honest, it sounds like wicked, so I'm thinking he's a bad one.
Yeah, the first time I am suspicious of him is before he talks about all of his woes and how he's been wronged by Mr. Darcy. He checks with Elizabeth. He goes, "Are you well acquainted with Mr. Darcy?" And when he finds out no, that's when he relays this story. And I also, the big red flag with Wickham from the beginning is when he says, "Oh, of course I'll go to the Netherfield ball. If Mr. Darcy doesn't want to see me, he can leave." But then Wickham doesn't show up for the Netherfield ball.
Oh my God, that kills me.
I'm like, dude, keep your story straight. Come on.
That's so true. And that literally just sums Wickham up, though. He's literally just like, oh, well, if I, like, he's the one that needs to leave, not me. And then it's literally just like, but then he leaves. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much you, Wickham. That's something you would do.
I know, I don't know how he gets over that, because like for us we're like, that's such a massive red flag, but then he tells his friend, isn't it, I think it's probably, is it Denny maybe perhaps, and he turns to Elizabeth and he's like, oh yeah, he would have come if it had not, been for not wanting to meet a certain gentleman or something,
the presence of a certain gentleman.
And I'm just like, after, like you say, after saying all that, like he was going to go and then decides not to, after sort of saying I'm going to go anyway, and then he does the complete opposite. So,
and then I think as well, were you mentioning kind of, even though a lot of people are really drawn in, like Mrs. Bennet's really drawn in, most of the Bennet sisters are, apart from Jane, who's already got her eye on somebody else. But I think earlier you were saying like Mr. Bennet is really not drawn in by him. He kind of suspects that he's maybe not upstanding.
Yes, that's one of my favorite things about Mr. Bennet, actually. I mean, I think he's hilarious throughout the book, but I think he and Ellis, you were saying Mrs. Gardner, those are the only two that really are suspicious of Wickham from the beginning. Mr. Bennet is so sarcastic about Mr. Wickham. I remember when Mr. Wickham comes to visit their house, he is just super sarcastic. He goes to Lizzie, when's your turn to come? Here are officers enough in Meryton to disappoint all the young ladies in the country. Let Wickham be your man. He's a pleasant fellow and would jilt you creditably. So I think Mr. Bennet just doesn't believe Wickham's stories. And I think especially in the 1995 version, he rolls his eyes at Lizzie and is like, are you seriously considering this person? I don't believe he's full of BS.
Yeah, definitely. I think he welcomes his niceness in a way. He's sort of happy to have this, friendly guy in his house, or, friends with his daughters, but he can see through, I think, it, and knows that it is all probably a bit too good to be true.
He loves the drama, Mr. Bennet does, I swear.
Well, it's like, yeah, well, like later when he lets Lydia go to Brighton and he's sort of like to Lizzie, or, let her go have her fun. She needs to go disgrace herself some way or another. And then she'll be happy. But anyway, back to everyone being taken in with him. I mean, there's a quote as well where Lizzie is sort of thinking about him and Austen writes, like, whatever he said was said well, whatever he did was done gracefully. Elizabeth went away with her head full of him. She could think of nothing but of Mr. Wickham. And I just think he's obviously one of those guys that could really get into your head, basically. And because he was probably good looking and charming, it's just like instant sort of, I don't know, like crush, isn't it, in a way? It's just, you see this guy, you haven't really seen any good looking guys, you just sort of, living at home with your sisters, this nice guy comes along and you can sort of see why she would be taking him with him and what have you. And people do notice that, like you said, Mr. Bennet notices that. And then, like I was saying before, her aunt, Mrs. Gardner, also notices it later on, because you were saying it was after. So basically, Mr. Wickham, he leaves the town, doesn't he, to pursue this lady called Miss King, who has a bit of a fortune behind her. So already his characteristics in that way are coming out. And she has a conversation with Elizabeth at the end of chapter 25, beginning of 26, and she warns Lizzie about her regard. She questions her and says, make sure you don't fall for him too much. Just be careful where you're going. And this is something I think you should, as a reader, you should really tap into, because I think Mrs. Gardner takes on that role as sort of a substitute mother for Lizzie. We obviously know that her relationship with her own mother isn't great. Mrs. Bennet is, as hilarious as she is come across as quite hysterical. She's not really close to her eldest daughters in particular. She sort of sees more of herself in her youngest ones. That's something that recurs basically in all the novels. And so I think, as a reader, that's something you should definitely take note of. Jane Austen does it time and time again. I think her own relationship with her mother wasn't great, and so these characters that come into the books that sort of take on the role of substitute mother, just like Jane Austen's sister Cassandra was kind of like a substitute mother for her and had a special relationship with her. So these characters are definitely worth listening to, and it's one of these big red flags about Wickham. So we've had another flag about him.
Yeah, I definitely think, especially as well, the Miss King situation is a big red flag. I think it's maybe later on in the book, but I think it's when Lizzie's then re-reflecting on the Miss King situation, and she says his attentions to Miss King were now the consequence of views solely and hatefully mercenary, and the mediocrity of her fortune proved no longer the moderation of his wishes, but the eagerness to grasp at anything. And I think when they first see Wickham with Miss King, they just think, oh, well, that's just normal, men will chase a fortune if they don't have one themselves, and they kind of brush it off a little bit, I think. But then later, when she finds out, kind of obviously, I mean, spoiler alerts, he runs off with, obviously, well, tries to run off with Georgiana, and then it comes out that he isn't a great guy. They look back on it and think, the evidence was there, we just couldn't see it.
Yeah, definitely. So should we can talk about when everything is sort of revealed. So after all that, we obviously have later on the proposal that Darcy makes to Lizzie, which she rejects on lots of different grounds, one of which is the character of Mr Wickham, which she says that Mr Darcy has done very wrong by him and he is suffering because of his actions. Darcy's obviously really annoyed at that. And we get obviously the letter which comes afterwards where he explains his actions, and Mr Wickham is part of that. And in this letter is revealed his character basically in terms of back when he was living under the care of Mr Darcy's father. So he was living on the estate with he was treated really well basically by the family. When Mr Darcy's father died, I think he left him a living, didn't he? He could go I think it was good to have like a parish or something.
Clergyman, yeah.
And some money given to him as well.
Clergyman, so, oh my God, can you imagine Wickham as a
I know, yeah.
clergy?
Let's just sort of take a moment to appreciate that. So yeah, he was offered to be a clergyman, which obviously didn't go down well with him. And he came to Darcy, didn't he, and say, can I just have like the money instead, basically? So
yeah, to go and learn how to be a lawyer or something. Yeah, go into the law. Yeah.
But he already squandered everything away, right? Because he had gambled everything away and then expected much more money to go into the law, and then was upset when Darcy said no.
Oh my God. What actually blows my mind is, can you imagine being like that entitled? Just, this isn't even a relative of his. This is genuinely just the son of a man who used to treat you well because your dad worked for him. Like, what? And you just like, can I have some more money? Because I didn't use the last lot very well.
Yeah, which precisely again is something which shows into his character. Like, he's just completely ungrateful for this help that a lot of people would have been grateful for, at this time, especially if his future was really uncertain. So he asks for more money, doesn't get the money, goes away, and then so Darcy's sister is younger than him, quite a bit younger than him, and he's sort of like a father figure to her. She goes off, she has a governess, which turns out she's sort of linked to Mr Wickham because he ends up coming down to visit her. I think they're in Ramsgate at one point, and he basically makes her fall in love with him. Again, that manipulative behavior. She thinks she's in love with him. She's only 16 as well. And we all know why he wants to marry her, and that's again for the money that she comes with. And luckily Darcy finds out before anything bad was going to happen, but I think they were probably going to run away together.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a quote from Darcy's letter, which kind of highlights all of this.
Mr. Wickham's chief object was unquestionably my sister's fortune, which is £30,000, but I cannot help supposing that the hope of revenging himself on me was a strong inducement.
Oh my gosh, does that not just sum it up? Like, seriously, if it's not bad enough that he's running off with his sister for his money, he's like, it's in like going to ruin her life because he's a horrible person. But he's like, he goes to the extra effort that it's like he's chosen her specifically to rub Darcy up the wrong way. Like, that's so twisted. This is why I hate Wickham, because it's like totally shameless. Of all the people you could pick, you're not just a fortune hunter. He's like a calculated fortune hunter that's like, two birds with one stone. I'll take her money and I'll, upset her brother and like ruin his life as well.
And that I think is a huge argument as to why people think that Wickham is the worst villain, just because he's so sociopathic almost. He's calculated, he chooses Georgiana to get back at Darcy. But on the flip side of that, he never shows any kind of embarrassment, flirting with Lizzie, then going after Miss King, then coming back, being in society, all smiles. He never shows any embarrassment or shame after seducing Lydia and then coming back and just smiling at the family, visiting with the father. There's just a lot of sociopathic behavior.
Yeah.
It's like he's almost incapable of feeling.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think, like you're saying, I think the strongest argument for Wickham is that there is no remorse, is there? There is just calculating behaviour in terms of he's done so much of it now, it just doesn't even affect him anymore. That's just his way of life, and he doesn't really care. And I always find it really harsh how, so obviously later on at the end of the book, he then so Lizzie's sister Lydia goes off to Brighton with the regiment. They obviously end up getting the news that she's run off with him, which is like really awful. They're not married, so it's a really big deal, and they're having to go off and find them now and make them marry. And again, he's obviously manipulated this young girl into marrying him, running away with him. Turns out I think he was running away from his debts anyway in Brighton, so he was running away from that. I sort of read into that and I was like,
legit. Not even just his debts, the fact that he'd been like meddling with other people's daughters. I mean, when did he even have the time to do this? I'm sorry, he was like out with Lizzie all the time. When was he possibly getting all these debts and, you know, getting it on with other people? I'm like, what?
No, it's awful, isn't it? He's just so chaotic. Anyway, and then I was thinking, how awful is it though? Because he's chosen the youngest daughter of a family who don't really have much of an income. I was just reading about it. I've just been reading that Lucy Worsley book, Jane Austen at Home, and sort of looking, which has been really great context. And you know, she's talking about incomes in there, and Mr Bennet's income was about 2,000 a year, which was just sort of enough to be on that gentry scale, just enough to have, you know, what it was, but not enough obviously to give his daughters a dowry.
Specifically if you have no sons.
Exactly. So, you know, he's chosen the youngest daughter of a family that don't really have much of an income, and he knows the devastation that it's going to cause because he's obviously from a family that weren't actually well off. So why is he doing it to another family he doesn't even know, like, they can guarantee that they can give him any money or help their situation out, and he's, you know, going to be probably he ends up having a lifetime of having to probably scrimp and save, you know, because just putting through a family that he befriended and one that he knew didn't have much money like himself and making them suffer. And I think that is really awful.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. Like, I don't even know what his motive was there. Like, sleeping with Lydia, I mean, is that enough for like to cause that much chaos? It just seems bizarre to me. Like you said, that he was literally not hardly going to get anything from it. And I think what's really sad, even though Lydia's not, you know, anyone's favorite character, is at the end of the book it says, with such a husband her misery was considered certain.
Yeah, I had that quote as well. And I also had this one, so at the end Elizabeth is sort of thinking about it, and there's this quote, and she's sort of thinking, and it goes, Wickham's affection for Lydia was just what Elizabeth had expected to find it, not equal to Lydia's for him. Their elopement had been brought on by the strength of her love rather than by his, and she would have wondered why, without violently caring for her, he chose to elope with her at all. I think that's everyone's question.
Why of all the people? At least with Georgiano, there was like the money and then the added bonus that he'd be able to, like, you know, get back at Darcy. But I don't know what he gains from Lydia. Does he hate Elizabeth for like calling him out? I don't know.
Yeah, I think again, it just shows how little conscience he has. I just don't think he really thought about it. He's an opportunist, and he probably was attracted to her, felt like sleeping with her, and didn't think the rest of it through. And I think it's very clear he was not going to marry her until Mr. Darcy forced him to. But yeah, the idea that there's just no shame for any of his actions.
The only thing that I could think is if he was to know that Darcy wanted to be with Elizabeth, and then he tries to sabotage that by obviously putting her family in disgrace.
Yeah, I did think that, but obviously there's not very much evidence for it. But obviously he does know by this point that Darcy is sort of entangled with the Bennet family a little bit, and I don't know if he knew how much he would come running to help. But it is something that definitely crossed my mind.
Or maybe so he could just cover up his lies. Like, he's told so many lies now. The only way to maybe earn forgiveness, in a sense, would be to marry Lydia, because then they'd have no choice but to still accept him. Or at least be with Lydia or whatever. Like, do you know what I mean? Trying to force himself into the situation. Like, they couldn't really reject him at that point if they wanted to maintain an appearance in society.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because there was no guarantee of marriage when he ran off with her, and he clearly didn't like her, and then they were forced to marry. And obviously I find it always really funny how Mrs. Bennet is like distraught at one point and thinking what we're all thinking and saying what a horrible person he is, and then like you have that scene where I think it's in the film 2005 or something, where she finds out that they've married, and she literally just sits up in bed and is just like, Lydia married, and she's all very excited and starts running around. Just a complete transformation. I think it happened in the 1995 one as well, and I just think just how, I don't know, funny it is how she goes from one to the other, and just obviously that idea of marriage is the thing that is key to making sure you're not ruined. And
yeah, I kind of love the scene where Mrs. Bennet's like saying that Lydia needs to come back to Meryton because she doesn't know where the best warehouses are for dresses.
Yeah, I love that bit. And they're all like, look, you won't be able to go wedding dress shopping with her, okay? You just got to leave it.
Yeah, like, this is a massive scandal. Like, Mum, seriously, this is not a normal wedding.
Yeah.
You know what else I was thinking when you were talking about Wickham's motivation is, I guess the question is, did Wickham ever truly care for Elizabeth on a deep level? And what I think is no, I just don't think he has. I think he's sociopathic. He doesn't have the capacity to feel, but I think if he had the choice of anyone, he would have chosen Elizabeth. And it never says this in the book explicitly, but in the 1995 version, he's walking with Elizabeth and he says to her, you know, I just want you to know that if circumstances were different, I wouldn't have gone with Mrs. King. I would have gone with you. I'm paraphrasing. But I always wondered, did Wickham go off with Lydia because Lydia was the closest person that he could have to Elizabeth, right? He couldn't have Elizabeth, so did he deflect and go off with her sister?
Maybe did he realize that Elizabeth was maybe too good for him? Like, was that it? I don't know.
Is there a redeeming quality there? Did he maybe not go for Elizabeth because he thought she could do better?
No, because by saying that, he knows he's a bad one. So he knows that Elizabeth is too good for him. But yeah, but maybe, there was something there where he knew maybe if he went with Elizabeth that he would basically ruin her life, and he couldn't do that. So maybe that's like a weird, twisted, good quality, or maybe we're just sort of imagining that, but it's something to think about. I was also talking to a friend last night as well about sort of other interpretations of Wickham, and I don't know whether you guys have read or seen Death Comes to Pemberley by P.D. James, and obviously that one focuses very heavily on Wickham and his story, his backstory. It does slightly make you feel sorry for him a little bit in the TV adaptation, but Darcy's obviously called in again to help him, and although he is the baddie, he didn't actually commit the murder, which is what he's basically accused of. But it is revealed at the end that he got a girl pregnant whilst he was married to Lydia, I think. So they've sort of taken it a step further and almost done like a Willoughby on him, being, and obviously thought that his character, James obviously thought that his character's so bad that that's what he would have done, like after they were married. And there's all this chaos that sort of ensues around it. And I thought it was quite interesting the way that she sort of focused on his story a lot in terms of like coming up with a narrative sort of post Pride and Prejudice, which a lot of people obviously like to think about and imagine.
Right. He's a complex character. I mean, I'd love to reread Pride and Prejudice with fresh eyes and like see if I was fooled by him. Do you know what I mean? Like read it and then the shock of him, it all being lies and him actually being the villain, I think would be interesting. Like I can't remember because I read it when I was so young. I can't remember what it was like to read it and be like, oh my gosh, what? Like this is crazy.
Yeah, I know. I always thought when I read it as well, I sort of knew in the back of my head that he was the bad one anyway, because obviously there's always going to be one. But I think it would be really interesting. Like, I know there's been versions of sort of, I read a book that is called Mr. Darcy's Diary, and I think you got Mr. Knightley's Diary, and it tells the story from their perspective. It would be quite cool. I don't know if there is one of like Mr. Wickham's diary. It would be quite interesting to read and see from his story. I know recently there's been a sort of like a theatre production thing being done by, so the guy who played Mr. Wickham in the 1995 one, he's doing like a one-man sort of performance where he does this monologue of him being older. I think it's like the eve of his 60th birthday, and he's like sort of, I'd love to go see it because I've only obviously seen like snippets of it on the trailer, but I think it's really interesting that again they've taken that character, he's reflecting on his life, and I think he's sort of saying, you know, he's not a villain and he's probably trying to justify his actions or sort of say why he did certain things, and how, you know, for Mr. Darcy it was easy to do what he did because he's rich and he sort of can do what he wants, whereas for him he's had to be clever, he's had to be sly, he's had to sort of work his way up in the world. And I think that was sort of really interesting. But I love how it is, I can't remember the actor's name, but I love how it's him from the BBC one. He played Mr. Wickham and sort of coming back again and doing it, and I think that's really cool because he obviously knows that character pretty well.
Yeah, that's so true. I've seen that advertised as well. Yeah, I'd love to see it. I've got a quote here that says, and this is about Wickham and Darcy, like in comparison, it says, one has all the goodness and the other all the appearance of it. And I think that's so key. I think the thing about Wickham is at the start, Darcy's obviously, it's easy to dislike Darcy at the start when you don't know Darcy's Darcy, because you're like, this guy's super rude and he hurts Elizabeth. And then in comparison, you have Wickham, who's comes across like he's a good friend to Elizabeth. He wants to go to all the parties and meet Elizabeth's family and all that kind of thing. And it is really interesting, that surface level attraction, as opposed to with Darcy, obviously it's deeper, and in the end, he's the one that's really there for her.
Oh my gosh, going off of that, that reminds me of my other favorite Mr. Bennet quote. He sees that superficial quality in Wickham that draws everyone in. And so after Lydia and Wickham visit and leave, this is what he says. He goes, Mr. Wickham is as fine a fellow, he said, Mr. Bennet, as soon as they were out of the house, as I ever saw. He simpers and smirks and makes love to us all. I'm prodigiously proud of him. I defy even Sir William Lucas could produce a more valuable son-in-law. So like, I think that is such a roast, because Mr. Bennet thinks that Mr. Collins is the biggest idiot alive, and you can tell he thinks Mr. Wickham's worse.
Yeah, which is so true, because even though Mr. Collins, people sort of make fun of him as being sort of annoying and weird, but he's funny, you know, he's harmless in terms of like his intentions are sort of honorable, I guess, even though he's weird. But yeah, in terms of being a villain, Mr. Bennet's obviously identified the difference in that.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have any other points, Alice, on Wickham that you want to bring in?
I think I pretty much covered most of what I want to say. I mean, I think once we get onto Willoughby, like later on towards the end, we can
bring some more stuff in,
and I can sort of do a little bit of a contrasting. But yeah, I think definitely let's move on to Willoughby if we're ready.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm happy to do that. Caily, take it away.
Hey. So John Willoughby is from Sense and Sensibility. And I guess when we first meet him, two sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, their mother, Mrs. Dashwood, and their younger sister, Margaret, all are forced to move from their home, Norland, because their father dies. And the dying request to his son is that they're provided for. And the son is quickly talked out of providing for them by his wife. And so they all are forced to downsize. So they move to this very small home, Barton Cottage. And Willoughby is a neighbor. He lives at Allenham in his Aunt Mrs. Smith's home. And the first time that he enters the story, we see this Marianne and her sister Margaret are out climbing hills, and it's raining, and he comes into the story as this hero because Marianne falls down the hill and sprains her ankle, and he comes swooping in. He's this handsome man. He carries her all the way back to the cottage. And the rest is history between Marianne and Mr. Willoughby. So right away, they both are presented as having very similar dispositions. They're both super passionate. They're into literature. They're into music. And he becomes very attached to Marianne and attached to the whole family. And, you know, through many chapters, he very quickly becomes like a brother and son-in-law. And everyone suspects that Marianne and Willoughby are engaged because of the way that they act with each other, particularly in public. They only talk to each other. They only dance with each other. And everyone starts making comments that they're engaged. And there are several ways, we'll get into it, that he definitely leads Marianne on. He begs for a lock of her hair. He takes her to his house and they're alone, unchaperoned. He tries to give her a horse. There are all kinds of things that happen where everyone just assumes they're engaged, including her older sister, Eleanor, who has really good judgment, and Mrs. Jennings. All of these people expect for them to be engaged. And all of a sudden, out of what seemed to be out of the blue, we think that he's about to propose to Marianne, or that they're going to announce their engagement. And all of a sudden, Eleanor and Mrs. Dashwood come home and find Marianne crying. And he suddenly says, "Oh, I have to leave, Alan. I'm sorry. Also, I'm never coming back." And that's a big paraphrase, but that's basically what happens. And so then they're all very confused and they have no idea what to do. They assume he's coming back. And Marianne is completely distraught. And so then they end up visiting Mrs. Jennings, and they're in the same place as Willoughby. And Marianne writes to him, tries to meet up with him. He visits their house. We find out later he visits their house to call on them when he knows they're not home, to check off the box that he tried to visit, but then makes no contact. Then they run into him at a ball and he's with this Miss Grey. And Marianne sees him and goes, "Willoughby, good God, what's the matter? Why haven't you responded to any of my letters? How are you?" He snubs Marianne. She nearly faints. And I love this edition. It's not actually in the book, but in one of the adaptations, she basically faints into Colonel Brandon's arms and he helps get her home. But Marianne is completely distraught and he marries this woman, Miss Grey. And nobody understands what happened because it had been so clear that he and Marianne were enmeshed. And then all of a sudden he's engaged to someone else. So what we find out is that before he even met Marianne, he got Colonel Brandon's ward, Eliza Williams. He got this girl who was 15 years old, pregnant, and then didn't leave his address, promised he'd come back, ran off. And this girl, we talk about how the Bennett sisters didn't have very much money and were in a vulnerable position. But if you think about how the vulnerability of their position compared to this woman, Eliza Williams, she was the daughter of Colonel Brandon's first love, this woman that he wanted to marry. They were supposed to run off together and elope, but then this girl becomes engaged and married to his brother. The brother treats her horribly. He divorces her, and then she ends up sleeping with this man out of wedlock, and then her daughter Eliza arrives. So this girl Eliza is already in an extremely vulnerable position. She has no status in society, and the fact that Willoughby gets her pregnant when she's 15 years old and does nothing about it and goes off and has this flirtation with Marianne is pretty horrifying. And so basically the reason that he left Marianne was that his aunt, Mrs. Smith, found out that he got this girl pregnant. And so he realized, I'm not going to get the money that I thought I was promised. And so he ends up being a gold digger, and he in the book, it says that he is certain that if he pursues this woman, Miss Grey, that he has access to her money, which makes me think that he had already had this attachment and flirtation with Miss Grey. So she was also an option. So anyway, summary is we can talk about whether or not we think he actually cared for Marianne, but whether or not he did, he chose money over and just financial stability and security over being with Marianne. And the way that he expressed that was pretty horrifying. He wrote her a letter. He wrote her a letter saying all kinds of things, but denying that there was any kind of romantic attachment. And he had no idea what he could have done to offend her. And he was sorry he had apparently offended her at the ball. Just a lot of horrible leading on and mixed messages.
And he sends her hair back. Like, what would you even do with that? I'd be like, don't give my hair back. What am I going to do with a strand of hair you cut from my head? Like, what?
No, and it's so sad because that was such a big deal. Like back then, if you give someone a lock of your hair, it was like, it's true love.
Right.
It's so romantic.
Yeah, but he gives back all of the letters as well. Like he really does. Although
Yeah.
we can kind of discuss that it's actually Miss Grey who
writes
it. Well, doesn't write it. She writes it and he rewrites it out so that it's in his handwriting. But I mean, that just kind of freaks you out. I mean, that shows that woman is like calculated. So maybe they're kind of made for each other in the end.
Yeah, that's horrible because obviously she even knows that they've had some sort of relationship, if you can call it that. But we found out that she was literally like standing over him, making him do it or something, and then sent it all back. So those things that he obviously said in the letter is just horrible because obviously Marianne doesn't even know that it wasn't his sort of writing, but he's obviously been forced to do that and he's not stood up and not even apologized for his behavior. And he says, I mean, in the letter, and obviously again, like I say, it's Miss Grey, but he says, I don't know, paraphrasing here again, but I don't know what I've done to basically make you think that my intentions were that, and if I've sort of acted like that, I'll be more careful in the future not to basically be like that again. And everyone's like, what?
Honestly,
which is just so horrifying because the amount that he did lead her on is unbelievable. I mean, in the letter it says, "Oh, I'm returning the lock of hair that you bestowed," basically that you gave to me. Whereas if you go back to the scene, he was sitting, Margaret is the one who noticed what was happening when he asked for the lock of hair. He was begging Marianne for the lock of hair. Actually, this is what Margaret said. They were whispering and talking together as fast as could be, and he seemed to be begging something of her. And presently he took up her scissors and cut off a long lock of her hair and kissed it and put it into his back pocket. That behavior for that time was so suggestive of a serious romantic attachment. And I mean, the way he led her on was to the point where Miss Jennings, after he and Marianne when the picnic got canceled, they snuck off to see his house in Allenham. Mrs. Jennings found out and she goes, "I hope you like your new house, Miss Marianne," and talks about visiting her there. I also think a really important scene is when it was super insensitive of him. He doesn't realize that the Dashwoods can't financially provide for a horse, but he just tried to give Marianne this horse, Queen Mab. And then Marianne has to refuse it. Eleanor convinces her to. And then he says, "Well, Queen Mab will be waiting for you when you can."
Yeah, I'm going to keep it in my house ready for you, which just all shows that he was intending for Marianne to move in with him, to be with him. Honestly, back on the lock of hair though, can you imagine how many locks of hair Wickham has in his drawer? Look like a wig in there.
I love that. Yeah.
So true. Yeah, no, I just found the horse passage, but it says, "But Marianne, the horse is still yours, though you cannot use it now. I shall keep it only till you can claim it. When you leave Barton to form your own establishment in a more lasting home, Queen Mab shall receive you."
I wonder if he sent the horse over to Brandon's house. Here you go.
As your wedding present.
Wait, that's amazing.
That's awful, isn't it? Yeah. I think it's so sad. I think with this story, I think it's more of just like a sadness rather than all out hatred like we have for Wickham, because I think what people and what readers hold on to is this idea that he did love her and he sort of got caught up in this thing that spiraled out of control and he got, sucked into a way of life that obviously came back to bite him later on, so that moments of being, of pleasure, of just sort of being careless, has cost him his own happiness as well. And I think he probably realizes that later on when he comes back and, speaks to Eleanor in that. And Marianne's basically upstairs dying and yeah,
it reflects on everything. I think I was basically saying before though that Willoughby's basically like at this, he's so similar to Frank Churchill. It's just that Frank Churchill doesn't make as many mistakes as Willoughby, I think is the key. But in terms of being kind of like a rich heir who's young, attractive, and is basically just living his life, I just think he doesn't understand responsibility. Do you know what I mean? Like he's never had to. And so he goes through life and makes these mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's it. And also, I'm not saying this as well to sort of excuse his behaviour, but obviously in the context of that time, like there were a lot of men sort of that age with that wealth sort of going around and, they had mistresses, they did that sort of thing for fun. They went and found, women and it was sort of accepted in terms of the fact that a lot of guys did it, but it obviously wasn't accepted. Like even Jane Austen was able to sort of be like, this is completely horrifying and unacceptable to sort of get this poor girl pregnant and leave her there stranded with this child and not even like provide any sort of, living or future for the child. Even if you didn't want to take care of it, you could have at least done something for the poor child, basically.
Right. She really slaps us around the face with that one as well, because it's like he's obviously started rejecting Marianne, and then next thing you know, it's like Brandon's like, well, I've got something else to add to the pile. He also impregnated my ward, and we're just like, what? Oh my god.
I love that. Just keep adding into the pot and keep stirring.
Yeah, and I think we have to think about, like, I agree. I think he did really care for Marianne, and when we think about Wickham being sociopathic, he never really hurt Lizzie. Like Lizzie in Pride and Prejudice is never really permanently damaged by what he did, whereas Wickham did lead Marianne on so much that he really hurt her. So is it worse to be like Willoughby, where you have the capacity to feel something that's real, but then you still act in such a way to hurt the person you love?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And also we have like sort of Marianne almost in disbelief, and she's slightly, I know in the film she tries to defend him quite a lot. And I don't know, I mean, I was sort of thinking about that in terms of like the way we see Wickham and Willoughby and how bad they are. And it's like, do we feel, do we hate on Wickham more in general because we sort of find out about his actions before he runs away with Lydia, so we're aware of what happened. We get the letter, we know pretty early on that he's a bad guy, whereas with Willoughby we don't know the full extent of his character until towards the end of the book, well, at least after he's had sort of his flirtation with Marianne, and in a way you're sort of weirdly rooting for their love story to be a success because you can see there is something there. And so, like Marianne, do we sometimes sort of defend that because we've seen that there was feeling and a love story and perhaps the intention of love and marriage, but we know now it was a lucky escape, and we only found out about sort of the Eliza thing and his character further after we've had
after he's already broken her heart.
So after we've had that moment where we all sort of fell for him a little bit, whereas we never really had that with Wickham. We sort of were suspicious of him the whole time. So I'm thinking, does that emotion play into the character in terms of perhaps Willoughby is worse of a villain in terms of like his actions, but Wickham's sort of more hard in terms of the way he goes down his story, and there's not as many emotions flying about there.
Yeah, I think in the sense of that as well, in terms of like emotions, but I think this is maybe why sometimes it's easier to think Wickham's worse as well, is because we don't have an emotional connection to Eliza. Do you know what I mean? So it's like we don't feel that strongly about it. I mean, that maybe this is just personal, but finding out about it, it's just about hearing about some like random person that's only just being brought into the picture, and it's like, yeah, that's a terrible story, but we have an emotional connection to Marianne. So whatever happens to Marianne, we actually feel. And he does break a heart, and that's terrible. But what he does to Eliza is a hell of a lot worse. But we don't have that same emotional reaction to it, if you know what I mean. It just adds to the pot of this is worse for Marianne. We don't think of it as, oh my gosh, Eliza, that's terrible for her. We think, well, this is it now. That's the final nail in the coffin. He can't be with Marianne now.
Yeah. So do we try and sort of brush that under the carpet a little bit? Because like I say, we've had this whole scene play out with him and Marianne, and like you say, we've got their emotions going. Where with Wickham, I feel like I say, it's just so easier to sort of hate on him and say that he's a bad guy because everything he does is manipulative and with the intention of either money. He's a cold character in that respect. So I think that's my sort of take on it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think it's difficult to fully hate Willoughby because we're so drawn in by him and are rooting for him and Marianne at the beginning. Whereas Wickham, just like you said, there's a suspicion there the whole time, and he never hurts our beloved heroine, Lizzie. But one thing reading it back, though, that makes me question Willoughby is I at the beginning, part of the reason I rooted for Willoughby and Marianne is I thought they were exactly the same. Like Marianne says, her ideal man must enter all my feelings, the same books, the same music, must charm us both. And I thought they did have the same interests, but there's such an interesting passage where you find out that Willoughby is just kind of trying to please her. He doesn't actually start out having the same interests. So it says their taste was strikingly alike. The same books, the same passages were idolized by each. Or if any difference appeared, any objection arose, it lasted no longer than till the force of her arguments and the brightness of her eyes could be displayed. He acquiesced to all her decisions, caught all her enthusiasm, and long before his visit concluded, they conversed with the familiarity of a long-established acquaintance. And then here's another. Her favorite authors were brought forward and dwelt upon with so rapturous a delight that any young man of 25 must have been insensible indeed, not to become an immediate convert, however disregarded before. So I think what's interesting there is I loved Willoughby initially because I thought he was so open and he actually was the same as Marianne, but he's kind of a master manipulator too. He saw what she loved and then just melded to it.
Right. We bring that up quite a bit in the episode on Colonel Brandon, don't we? That's episode 2, if anyone wants to go and have a listen. But there's actually a quote that says that he basically designed himself perfectly to fit Marianne's like desires. And that is a bit dodgy, because how long does that last? Like, how long can you sustain that?
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's that fakeness coming through. And I mean, he say later on when he talks to Eleanor at some point that obviously he admits to that, and he says like at first it was just sort of a bit of fun and he was just trying to conform to what she liked as well, but then he did sort of realize actually he got too far deep into it and was just like, actually this is turning into something more than just messing about basically, and I do really like her, and I can see that obviously she really likes me because, you know, like Marianne says, she always wears her heart on her sleeve. So yes, I think that is kind of sad.
Yeah, that is something to his credit. You're right. And when he comes to visit Eleanor and is drunk and is expressing remorse, he says, yeah, at the beginning, I just wanted her to be interested in me. I didn't have any intention of seriously pursuing her. But just like you said, he admits to falling for her. And so I think that's why some people really are on his side, because even though he made his mistakes, he acknowledged them and admitted that he cared for Marianne and he showed some kind of remorse. Whereas Wickham never took any responsibility for what he did, never demonstrated any kind of remorse. And so I think that's why a lot of people at the end do have some kind of sympathy for Willoughby.
Yeah. I mean, effectively, as readers, we're all Marianne, aren't we? We were all taken in by him and then left to deal with the consequences. Because, you know, it is really good at drawing you in, and like we said, you know, wanting to root for Willoughby. And it's so hard because he is a really complex character as well in terms of sort of what is real and what isn't real with him, and just generally getting sucked into quite a really difficult situation where he realized actually his actions had a massive impact.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, I totally agree. I think another thing about Willoughby, though, is that he's got such hatred of Brandon. Like, again, we do discuss this in the second episode, but I think the fact that he like dislikes Brandon so much, is so open about it, which is a little bit awkward considering Eliza later on. I feel like that speaks to his character as well. Like, he dislikes somebody who is actually genuinely a good person. And like, if that kind of personality repels you so much, what does that say about you?
Yes, he's so mean-spirited about Brandon, and I always wondered about that. I thought Colonel Brandon had not done anything to deserve that treatment. He literally says, Brandon is just the kind of man whom everyone speaks well of and nobody cares about, whom all are delighted to see and nobody remembers to talk to. So kind of a way of bonding with Marianne is by just saying really horrible things about people, particularly Brandon.
Yeah, and that's obviously some sort of jealousy coming through as well, which again is one of our red flags. And he obviously is quite jealous of Colonel Brandon because obviously he did find some favor with Marianne a little bit at the start. I mean, not loads, but and obviously there is then the backstory with his ward and everything else. So he's obviously trying to distance himself from Colonel Brandon as much as possible.
Honestly, this is a complete side note, but crying. When you just said red flag, then it literally just came to mind. I'm like, Wickham's literally a red flag. Like, he walks around and looks like a red flag.
That's literally his uniform, his outfit, his costume. He's just walking across the screen.
I mean, why could we not see it? Like, it's so obvious. It's right there.
He's literally in front of us wearing red. His name and his outfit just sums him up, doesn't it, really? Which is hilarious. I love that. Also, another side note, you were talking about Mrs. Jennings earlier, and she is absolutely hilarious. I mean, she's really annoying, but also she's probably one of the funny characters in that she sort of says what she thinks. And obviously she does partake a lot in what was going on. And it is just funny how other people like perceive the relationship as well with Marianne and Willoughby. And, you know, they were all sort of taken in and for it. And then as soon as he did that, they were completely switched and saying how much of a bad guy he was and how much they knew he was always a bad guy.
Yeah, everyone says that after the fact. I'd say what's interesting, though, is Eleanor's always maybe slightly suspicious of him. And also, I think what's interesting is she picks up on the fact that he doesn't bring out the best in Marianne. Like, he does bring out the worst. Like, she's always been like, Marianne, that's really not appropriate, or like, you can't behave that way. And Marianne becomes more and more of her worst qualities, I think, when she's with Willoughby. And I think that, again, shows that they're not meant to be together. Because when she's with Brandon, he brings out the good qualities in her.
Yeah, that's something I've really noticed watching the film recently as well. It actually sort of began to cringe me out a little bit because I was thinking, like you say, it didn't bring out the best qualities in Marianne as a character when she was with him, you know, when they're like charging around the village and with his horses and carriage or whatever. And it's just, you sort of do cringe slightly for them because you know what people are thinking. And, you know, like you're saying, perhaps he wasn't actually the best person for her, despite them thinking that they were so similar, like you were saying, Caily, like that was actually quite false. It wasn't true. And you sort of think later down the line when they were married, I wonder how sustainable it would have been. And in my head, I could probably see him being unfaithful and things like that.
Yeah, 100%.
I think they were extremely self-absorbed individually. And then when they were brought together, it was like they were just this bubble of self-absorption. They wouldn't even talk to anyone else. And I could see them in the future just imploding. They both were very high-spirited, but I just think that base level of selfishness is really cringy, just like you said.
Yeah, I think with time as well, Marianne actually grows into quite a respectable person. And I don't think Willoughby would have been able to shake his like materialistic desires. And so I think that would have destroyed them as well. Like, I don't think she actually could have coped, because I don't think he would have changed much, whereas I think she always would have changed as she grew up. So I don't think she could have coped with him long term.
I agree.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there was just so many, so much emotion, so much passion involved with them, and it was so intense, their relationship as well that they had. You sort of think, would it all come to blows maybe later on, because they just were constantly like really, it was just really intense when they were together, weren't they? And I don't know how great that would have been for long-term marriage. Obviously, when she marries Brandon, I think he's got a way where he's able to encourage those passions and those pursuits, and encourage her in a positive way that Willoughby perhaps wasn't able to.
Yeah, and considering I'm going to play mediator, I'm going to play devil's advocate as well, and say, is there something to be said about the fact that Willoughby is so honest? Like, in the end, he does say, I'm too materialistic. I never could have done without the money. It was always going to be important to me. And also being like, saying the truth of to start with, I was literally just messing around with Marianne. Then I grew to have feelings for her. Like, does Willoughby's honesty make him better? Like, the fact that he's truthful about it? I don't know.
I think maybe as a reader, you sort of like that, because you can sort of justify your the way you felt for him as well whilst reading the book, and you think, okay, it's fine, because he comes back later and realizes too that he messed up, so we can sort of appreciate that a bit. And like you say, he does come back and admit those faults, and we don't have that with Wickham at all, really, do we?
I agree. I appreciate that he shows remorse and is honest when he comes and talks with Eleanor. That being said, the fact that he did love Marianne and he could look her in the eye at the ball. Actually, he didn't even look her in the eye. He looked at Eleanor the whole time and shun her. And then I know it was his future wife's words, but the fact that he could write that letter to her is pretty unforgivable. It's interesting. The more I reread it, the more I don't forgive Willoughby.
Right. And it's like honesty after the fact as well. It's not like he went to Marianne and was like, look, we can't be together because I need somebody with more money. Like, he didn't say he wasn't honest with Marianne and be like, I need somebody else. I'm sorry. So I'm going to go marry Miss Grey. He was like, I'm married Miss Grey, and now I'll be honest because I've already secured what I want.
Yeah, it was after the fact honesty and no courage in the moment to do right by her and be forthright. Just the fact that I think actually the cringiest moment, even more than the letter, is when he just leaves the family with no explanation. And Mrs. Dashwood is like, oh, that'll take you a couple days. We'll see you back here soon. And then he just goes, oh, I don't think I'll be able to come back within the 12 months.
Period.
Yeah. Like, what? So, yeah, not great. Not great actions.
Yeah, agreed. I agree with you. I feel like the more I read it now, the more I come to dislike his story. And like we say, we have managed to pull out a lot of redeeming qualities for him. And obviously his story is very different to Wickham's, but you can, on rereading it, you can see how awful it sort of all played out, really. And like you say, that scene where the two scenes, one where he just leaves them, like you say, and it's just so awkward. And then the other where they're in the ballroom just completely breaks my heart. It's so sad.
I think what's super sad as well is, had he been honest with Marianne, I think she would have let him go. Like, if he turned around to him and was like, I'm sorry, but I need more money because that's just how society works or whatever. I think she loved him enough to turn around and be like, yeah, I understand, I'll let you go. Like, she would have been heartbroken still, but I think she would have done that.
Yeah. Or even said, like we've said, you know, when he admits his qualities and, well, his qualities really and his faults, and says, you know, I am materialistic. This is the person I am. Maybe if he'd have sort of realized that sooner and just been able to say to her, actually, you know what, we're not going to be compatible in marriage. Like, I'm going to love you more by not marrying you, if that makes sense, rather than marrying you and actually explaining that. But he's quite selfish in how he does that.
I think you're both completely right about that. I think Marianne might have fought him on it initially, but I think what was so devastating to Marianne is the idea that he never loved her or just all of a sudden stopped loving her. And so I think the closure she needed was just assurance that he did love her in the way that she loved him.
Yeah, agreed, for sure. I think a lot of people, you know what I'm also finding, I think as I grow older and I think about it more, and I think, how would I feel if Willoughby was in my life? That makes me think, actually, he's a real bad guy, because sometimes I think about it because he doesn't end up with Marianne, I can kind of brush it off and be like, oh, maybe he wasn't so bad. But had he ended up with Marianne, I think we all would have been like, this guy's horrific.
That is so true. That is so true. And sort of you think about, like you say, as like growing older, in terms of what would an ideal partner look like for us now. You know, the idea of Willoughby sounds exciting, like it was to Marianne. He sounds like that dream guy, like you say, appearing whilst the rain was pouring and saving her. And, you know,
I love the slow motion version in the film where he whips his hat off and he's like, da-da-da.
Yeah. And then like in the film where he's like, oh, permission to feel your ankle and stuff, and it's like obviously with the most like outrageous thing, because obviously ankles were quite, you know, showing your ankle, and now this guy's just appeared like feeling the bone. I just find it absolutely hilarious, and her face is like so yeah, this guy's turned up and just completely turned into a heroine. And yeah, he is sort of the hero of, you know, romantic stories, so it appears. But then, like, which is quite a recurring theme, you know, in Pride and Prejudice and in this one, it is this idea of first impressions, which obviously was what Pride and Prejudice was originally called. And thinking, you know, on the surface, the people who look friendly and good and nice and not always what they appear to be. And, you know, today, what you want from like a partner, someone you're going to spend the rest of your life with, is someone who is, you know, is real with you, who encourages you in a good way, and is not sort of this like constant source of bringing like the worst out of you, like you were saying. And
someone who doesn't impregnate other women.
Yeah, that one as well. Might be helpful. The one that doesn't gamble or play around with, or, you know, the town's daughters. But yeah, I think that's probably like the lesson of the story, isn't it? I think that's the moral of what she's perhaps trying to say. And also, they're both involved with money, so I feel like Jane Austen's trying to tell us, like, don't live your life just trying to chase fortunes and money, because it's gonna hurt people.
Love over money, that's what I went my dissertation on. She preaches it.
Yes.
I love that connection you made with first impressions, which, like you said, that was what she originally called Pride and Prejudice. But yeah, the fact that you're kind of drawn in by this superficiality, and the person that could seem right for you is just is not. Yeah, wow, I really liked that connection, Alice.
I think it's a good summary then. That's first impressions, guys. Do not, future dating advice to anyone listening. Just don't go with your first impressions.
And avoid men in red. Yeah,
avoid men in red. People who come and find you during the storm. They might be cool at the time when they're saving you, but you've got to find out about them first.
Yeah, don't let them touch your ankles till you know the story.
No ankle touching.
Little bit of
a story.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but this just made me, something about that scene made me think of the fact that, did you know that Willoughby in real life is married to Eleanor? Emma Thompson is married to that Willoughby.
Is it
what?
Greg Wise, is that the guy?
Yeah, Greg Wise. They are married in real life. So
how did I not know that? I love Emma Thompson and I love everyone in that film. How did I not know that?
Oh my God, that's hilarious, because I was literally thinking, oh, well, at least Willoughby doesn't run off with a sister, but he does, technically.
But wait, plot twist.
real life, apparently, I think he saw a psychic or something. Hopefully this isn't wrong. I read that he saw a psychic that said, you're going to meet your future wife very soon. And then he's on the set of Sense and Sensibility, and he dated Kate Winslet for a little bit, but then ended up marrying Emma Thompson, and they're still happily together.
Oh my gosh. That's like some sort of weird Sense and Sensibility spin-off.
I know, right? That story should be written. Imagine Willoughby and Eleanor together. She'd annihilate.
Oh my God, that's mental.
Poor Hugh Grant.
I know, right? I think he did fine for himself.
Yeah. Right.
Still is, yeah. Still doing all right for himself. Yeah. Britain's Bachelor.
I think we definitely need to do a episode discussing the Ferrers family, because they are quite something.
Oh yeah. They've
or just like Edward Ferrers, anyway, because he's sort of got his own, even though he's not like, obviously he's not a villain, but he has his own struggles in the book, doesn't he, in terms of what happens with him and Lucy Steele, who is another villain.
Oh my gosh, she's going to be on a future villain up, I'm telling you. Lucy Steele
her
is
and
dark.
Caroline Bingley or something. Like,
what a call.
Yeah. But yeah,
stay
that's
tuned next year, guys.
Little side drama. Yeah, I'll be there. Set the date.
I might not want either of you there at that point. I might be like,
no, I'm gonna be tuning in.
The true villain off. It's actually me. I'm the villain of the day. So just as we're like wrapping up, we did put like questions out on Instagram about who people thought were worse. So it might be fun to just go through some of the answers of what people were saying. So for Wickham, there was a lot of, he's a pathological liar, can't accept responsibility for his actions. Willoughby, manipulative, opportunistic. We've got the fact that Willoughby impregnates a girl. Yeah, that's pretty bad. Then abandons her. He's obsessed with luxuries. Yep, again, the thing about him sleeping with Eliza. People say Willoughby's really selfish and that Marianne made a good escape, and I think he is quite selfish. This is a good one. So Willoughby, what he does leaves like scars and trauma that last forever. And that's really what we were saying before, like the emotional side of Willoughby maybe makes him worse because it actually has a lasting effect. Like Marianne's never the same again. She does nearly die, but she has changed.
Yep. That's a lot of the response that I got of people who thought that Willoughby was worse, was that at the end of the day, he inflicted more damage. And then others said, well, Wickham would have inflicted as much if he had ended up with Georgiana. That would have been a huge problem. If he had run off and not married Lydia and Darcy hadn't intervened, there would have been an equal damage inflicted. But yeah, one person who I was messaging with said the fact that Wickham was kind of sociopathic the whole time, whereas Willoughby had the capacity to feel and then still hurt Marianne that much, means that he's worse.
Oh, interesting. I've got a comment here that says, if Wickham did what he did in 2021, it could easily be undone, but what Willoughby did couldn't. Like, that's actually really interesting. That's so true. Like, if you brought it into a modern perspective, like what Willoughby did, that'd be it then. That would be it for her. Whereas Wickham, there's a hell of a lot of Wickhams out there in 2021. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're still living their life. So, but yeah, most of them is to do with Eliza, I think, for Willoughby. Some people are just being like scoundrel. I think that falls for both of them. Oh dear. I think people feel hurt by, I think most people actually dislike Willoughby the most. And I think it's because he draws you in and then you find out all this horrible stuff about him and then he breaks Marianne's heart and then he tries to come back and ask for forgiveness. But it's like, you're such a bad person. At least Wickham's just cuts him off and then that's it. And it's not you know what I mean? He doesn't leave too much destruction behind. Like, he's not actually managed to do that much damage. He's always caught, mostly by Darcy. But somebody's always there, like, cleaning up his mess. Nobody's cleaning up Willoughby's mess. It's just a mess.
That's true. Although if Darcy didn't clean up the mess, then that would have really affected the Bennet sisters. But like you say, his is more sort of clear cut, isn't it? I mean, it's easier to say, oh yeah, Wickham's the baddie. And then actually, like, that's sort of what I came into this thinking. It's easier just to say that he is the worst one, because in a way you don't want to deal with the emotions of Willoughby's story, do you? And then actually going deeper into it, you do realise that the scars that Willoughby leaves are a lot worse. I mean, obviously, like you say, they could have been worse with Wickham if he wasn't able to be sorted out by Darcy. But Willoughby didn't have anyone to do that for him.
No. Okay, shall we vote? Oh, go on, Caily. Give me your final thoughts. Do it, Caily. Do it.
I mean, it was really echoing what you were both saying, but I was just wondering, do you think Wickham would have gone to the extent that Willoughby did in expressing love for Lydia and leading her on to the extent that Willoughby did with Marianne? I think Wickham draws people in but cuts it off to a certain extent. Like, he did draw Lizzie in, but not to the point of really wounding her emotionally, whereas Willoughby just took it all of the way and just said all of these things, that making these promises to her that he would be with her. So it does feel like the scars that Willoughby inflicted were so much worse.
Yeah,
even if Darcy didn't intervene.
Right, it's so much deeper, isn't it? You're so true. Like, Willoughby always takes it all the way. Like, he must have with Eliza, because I mean, she's obviously sleeps with him, so he can't have just like thrown her a smile. I wouldn't have said. Like, I feel like he must have really shown her some affection. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I feel like Lydia's the type of person, Wickham probably could have just thrown her a smile and she would have like jumped all in at it. But Willoughby's is a bit more twisted than that. Like, he has to make people fall in love with him. I think he even says that about Marianne. Like, he wanted her to fall in love with him. Like, it's not enough for someone just to like him. They have to love him, and he'll go that far.
Exactly. Yeah, just a lot more emotional gaslighting.
Okay, shall we vote on it? Who do you think, Caily? Who's worse, Willoughby or Wickham?
This is so weird, because actually coming into this podcast, I have always argued that Wickham is worse, because I hate how sociopathic he is. But after talking it through, I think that Willoughby is worse.
Elle, go for it.
That's so funny. It is really hard, because like you, I thought quite similarly to that, in terms of it's easier and more clear cut to say that Wickham's bad. But I think, again, after talking it through, I would say, taking in Willoughby's whole story, what happens is worse in terms of the standards that was then and also now as well. But yeah, it's really hard. So I think I'd probably say Willoughby now, but it's really hard not to try and defend that little love story they had. And I think that's what a lot of people might struggle with, because with Wickham, you don't have to deal with any of that messiness. You can just be like, yeah, he's bad. So in terms of like a person, in terms of their being calculated, I think Wickham obviously is that guy. But yeah, I think Willoughby probably inflicts the most damage. Definitely.
True that. And also, like both of you, I came in thinking Wickham, but I think you've convinced me. I think Willoughby is worse. Like, I think the emotional damage is so much more severe from Willoughby. Like I said, someone's always cleaned up Wickham's mess, and whether or not that's hardly got anything to do with him, but the fact is that saves us the emotional damage than what we experience with Marianne and Eliza and all of the other people that Willoughby seems to inflict himself upon. So, villain off winner is Willoughby.
Yay! We shouldn't really be cheering, should we? But
yeah. I know, what's the opposite of cheering? Booing. Boo.
Bad Willoughby.
Who do you both think, if you met both of them at a party, who do you think you'd be more drawn in by?
Willoughby.
Yeah, I think it would have to be Willoughby. I mean, you would though be drawn in by both of them, wouldn't you? You just meet them and be like, oh, these are really fun.
Well, you say that, but
I
literally, when I was in high school, this guy turned up, and honestly, as soon as he literally said like a couple of lines, and all the girls were really drawn in by him, and literally straight away, I literally turned around to my friend and was like, "That guy's Wickham." Yeah. And she was like, "Who's Wickham?" I was like, "Oh, I forgot you don't read Jane Austen," but I was like, "He's Wickham."
Well, maybe that's it then, because like we were saying before, we were already like suspicious of Wickham anyway. So if he was so if we met both of them, I think like you guys say, it would probably be Willoughby you go for, because Wickham is so calculating. You can sort of see through that already.
Exactly.
Completely agree. Although part of me is now like, well, if Wickham appears more the bad boy, would I be more attracted to that?
Oh my gosh, that was great, guys. So where can people find you? Caily, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm half_agony_half_hope. So from Persuasion. Yeah, that's me.
I love that. It's one of my favorite Austen quotes. I am on Instagram as well, and I'm at historian_Ellis. So yeah.
I'll tag you below. But like I said, Elle was on for episode 1, which we covered lasting love and persuasion. So we talked about Anne and Wentworth. That was a good episode. And then me and Caily did episode 2, which was all about Colonel Brandon, and us talking about all the great things about Colonel Brandon. So yeah, you should head over to both those episodes. Cailly's been on again as well. Caily was on for August. Awkward Austen August. That's a funny one.
Awkward Austen characters. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, if you want a bit of a laugh, go to that one. But yeah, that's everything from us. So thanks for coming on, guys.
Thank you so much for having us. This is a blast.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was super fun. It was really, really good fun.